Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. Whitey Bulger was a major criminal, a major mafia figure here in Boston for many years, terrorizing the city of Boston, my hometown, while his brother was the president of the Senate, and it was an extremely corrupt situation. People were afraid to defy Billy Bulger, his brother, because Whitey was there essentially murdering people. He was implicated in more than 12 murders, and the FBI was involved in giving him a pass, covering up because he was letting them know what was going on the inside. But then we find out that several FBI agents had become so corrupted by the experience that in one case, that of Zip Connolly, he is spending, I believe, something like 30 years in prison. Whitey Bulger was recently murdered in prison. But his testimony, the testimony of Billy Bulger, his brother, when asked in Congress about his knowledge of Whitey Bulger after he had been on the lam, he was allowed to flee because of his FBI handlers sometime in the mid-1990s. Actually, I think it even goes back to the 80s. And Billy Bulger testified. This is this erudite, allegedly brilliant man who knew Latin and Greek and who was the president of the Massachusetts college system. And yet he couldn't remember when he was asked about Whitey Bulger. Did you ever speak to Whitey Bulger? Oh, I just don't recall. And then the next minute he'd be waxing with these lengthy, arrogant soliloquies about morality and about, deep law. And then the next question, I don't remember. And his testimony so outraged the governor of Massachusetts, who at that time was Mitt Romney, that Romney had him fired from the Massachusetts system. His testimony reminds me a lot of James Comey's testimony before Congress, behind closed doors. He didn't have to do it in public, where this man who had kept copious notes and who was, prided himself on a great memory and who wrote a whole book, he just didn't remember when the Congress asked him certain questions. All of a sudden, he would draw a blank. And that lack of memory, that amnesia, if you will, was juxtaposed with these arrogant, smug speeches about American values? Really? Then he comes out of the hearing and he lectures us about American values and why we must support the Democratic Party. And, James Comey represents true, in a way, very, not quite to the degree that Billy Bulger, but he represents everything that's wrong with the establishment. It's the classic example of what President Trump talks about when he makes reference to the deep state. This is a corrupted, arrogant, supercilious, incredibly out of touch establishment that thinks they can preach and get away with this kind of nonsense. Meanwhile, he's there essentially screwing people and covering up for what has to be, it has to look like the framing of General Michael Flynn, because they didn't like his politics and because they wanted to get a little insurance policy to go after Trump. Him and Strzok and McCabe and all the rest of these rotten FBI agents, all of which are disgraced and gone. And so that if, in case Hillary did not win, they could use this information in this phony dossier, which has been admitted by even the creator of the dossier at this point, that being this British citizen Steele, saying that it was nothing more than an attempt to attack Trump and to get at Trump. And it's basically been proven to be completely false. They wanted to use that to spy on Trump. And we are back. Sorry about the interruption. Anyway, so the James Comey testimony reminds me a lot of the Billy Bulger testimony, as he denied having had any contact with his brother, Whitey Bulger, who, rumor has it, in Boston, has millions of dollars in cash stashed around the country. Nobody knows where the money is, and nobody will know now that he's been murdered in prison. And that the other connection I want to make, besides this disgusting, ridiculous, smug preaching on the part of James Comey, the corrupt, dirty cop, the disgraced former FBI agent, lecturing us about values, is the fact that Whitey Bulger and Billy Bulger's reign of terror here in Boston happened to coincide with a U.S. attorney who was none other than Bob Mueller. And that Bob Mueller, more recently, has been implicated in the prosecution of 3 innocent men who were minor Italian mafia figures and who he put in prison for life after getting convictions, 2 of whom died in prison, 1 of whom was released, all of whom received settlements for wrongful convictions. And it was Bob Mueller, as U.S. attorney at the time, who was up to his neck in involvement in this. He also has, as FBI director, has played a role in trying to cover up the Boston Marathon bombing incident. In fact, he resigned from the FBI about maybe 3 or 4 months after that incident, and after Congressman Stephen Lynch of Boston tried to get the FBI to release information about the terrorists who bombed the Boston Marathon, and he was refused the information by Bob Mueller. So Bob Mueller is a cover-up artist from day one. There's a good book out about him that I actually interviewed the author. It's available on this podcast, and that is Bob Mueller, Errand Boy for the New World Order. I don't know if I'd get into New World Order, talk about it. I would just simply point out that his history is not exactly pure, and that he is involved in these kinds of prosecutions against figures who tend to defy the establishment. Of course, the most recent being the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and this whole frame-up around the FISA warrants, which were brought about under very questionable circumstances, and the fact that Comey and McCabe and these other corrupt FBI agents working with several corrupt State Department of Justice people like Bruce Orr and possibly Rod Rosenstein set this whole thing up to try to, if not take out President Trump by impeaching him, slow him down and impede his administration, which should not happen in this country. If you don't agree with President Trump's policies, fine. You take him on in Congress based on the policies themselves. You take him on in the area of public opinion. But you don't have the FBI and the Department of Justice going spying on him and then building phony dossiers and trying to use them to blackmail him and to eventually discredit him. This is something that both liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans should condemn. And, regardless of what you think about President Trump, of course, liberals and Democrats are so brainwashed into this cult of Trump hatred that they're willing to look the other way. When Mueller and Comey previously and others have done some incredible things that should really only be seen as appropriate in a police state. And now that we have the Democrats coming in, they're going to investigate every time Trump goes to the bathroom. I mean, every little move that man makes and has made, going all the way back to when he was in kindergarten, is now going to be investigated. And I think it's going to backfire on them, just like it backfired on the hearings of Brett Kavanaugh when they started to go through his yearbook in high school and look at charges that he might have been drinking beer 35 years ago. Oh, I like beer. That's right. This is appropriate for a Supreme Court hearing. So that's what we're going to expect. It is a full assault by the deep state, in my opinion. And there's a lot at stake here for all Americans. President Trump was elected. He ought to serve. He doesn't need this kind of impediment to his administration. And I hope people of goodwill are going to accept that that he ought to continue unimpeded. And then in 2 years from now, if he is not successful as president, then we'll have a chance to vote him out by electing a Democrat as president. But let's do it using our system of justice and our system of jurisprudence and our system of government, a system of checks and balances, not using our judicial system and our Congress as a tool to try to impede elected officials as opposed to legitimately oppose elected officials. So thanks for watching, everyone. That's what I have to say about that. And have a great evening. Thank you.